Empire was one of the largest centralized states in early modern history. Greater in size and resources than the contemporary Ottoman and Safavid Persian empires, and comparable with the Ming Empire in lands and subjects, the Mughal Empire covered almost the entire Indian subcontinent by the late 1600s, and encompassed a population of between 100 million and 150 million. The Mughal Empire, which existed for nearly 2 centuries, was extremely wealthy, and left a record of this wealth in the many public buildings and gardens that still remain in South Asia today. The Mughals also left a detailed visual record of their empire, thanks to the painters employed by the royal courts. Who were the Mughals? Let us begin by briefly looking at the emperors, because a brief introduction will give us a sense of personal contact with these men who presided over and helped to develop the institutions of the empire. Originating in Central Asia, the Mughals were descendants of Timur, the great Turkish conqueror of Central Asia in the 14th century. Such a legacy brought with it great horsemanship and military tactics, a nomadic life under tents, the Turkic language, and the Muslim faith. Babur, the first Mughal emperor, grew up in a Central Asia that was made up of a group of principalities in continuous conflict with each other. As he spent the first 20 years of his life fighting for his father's principality, he quickly developed good leadership and military skills. In 1504, he and his army were forced to flee south through the Hindu Kush into Afghanistan. This led to his capture of Kabul. Over the next 20 years, Babur conducted several raids into northern India, until in 1526 the declining popularity of the Sultan of Delhi enabled him to launch a successful invasion. So, at the age of 43, Babur established the Mughal Empire. Humayun was only 22 when he inherited the empire in 1530. Lacking the experience to consolidate a new empire, he was driven from northern India by the Afghan nobleman Sher Khan in 1540. After spending 15 years in exile, he marched from Kabul to Delhi to re-establish the Mughal Empire in 1555, only to die within 7 months by falling down the steps of his library in Delhi. Akbar was only a boy of 13 when he was enthroned as emperor in 1556. Often considered to be the greatest and most capable of the Mughals, Akbar was a great general, organizer, builder, and philosopher. He expanded the empire by conquering and uniting new territories in northwest, central, and eastern India. When Akbar seized the forts of Chittor and Ranthambore in Rajasthan, in a very public display of Mughal power, he was able to exert imperial control over the warrior caste of Rajputs. Jahangir, who nearly lost the throne to his oldest son, consolidated and expanded Mughal domination. He was a cruel and drunken emperor, but he did encourage the arts and built several beautiful gardens. Jahangir's reign was also notable for the influence of one of his wives, Nur Jahan, on the politics of the empire. Shah Jahan was already an established military leader when he became the 5th Mughal emperor in 1627. He inherited vast territories, unchallenged military power, and massive wealth. His lasting heritage is the Taj Mahal, the tomb which he constructed for his wife, and the building of a new capital city in Delhi, Shah Jahanabad, with its famous Red Fort. His reign, though, ended in a convulsive political crisis as his sons fought a war of succession. Aurangzeb, the last of the great Mughals, was the victor in a very costly civil war. Whilst territorial expansion continued, the nature of the Mughal Empire began to change, with more emphasis being placed on Muslim ideas. The nature of this change, and why it occurred, is even today a debated issue amongst historians. The outcome of this change of ideology brought disunity and unrest within the empire, which culminated in the Deccan Wars from 1687 until Aurangzeb's death at the age of 90 in 1707. The nature of the Mughal state. The Mughal Empire was a centralized, hierarchical and bureaucratic state with the emperor as the single source of political legitimacy and authority. This structure, based on Persian administrative ideals, was established by Akbar and changed very little until the 18th century. The administration of the empire was handled by 4 central ministers of equal power. They had the responsibilities of finance and revenue, army and intelligence, the royal household, and the judiciary and religious patronage. The emperor had the responsibility for diplomacy and external affairs. This structure was duplicated at the provincial level, with the governor being directly responsible to the emperor. The day-to-day administration of the state was in the hands of technically qualified officials and clerks, who were largely Hindus of the clerical castes. The higher administrative functions, positions such as governor and military commanders, were filled by the Mughal nobility. This nobility was made up of warrior aristocrats such as mature royal princes and nobles. It also included defeated chiefs and their adult sons, who often chose to join the Mughal court as part of an alliance. Asaf Khan was an example of such a noble, being an outstanding administrator and military commander for Jahangir and Shah Jahan. He was the brother of Jahangir's wife, Nur Jahan. All officers in the imperial elite were awarded a specified numerical rank and title by the emperor, which defined their status, pay, and type of assignments. Some 33 ranks were actually used, with the higher ones being awarded to military commanders. Increases and decreases in rank were all dependent on royal favor. All officers were also subject to assignment in any part of the empire. The nobility was drawn from diverse ethnic and sectarian groups to ensure that no single group could challenge the emperor's authority. The emperor usually held a durbar, or public audience, several times a day to show that all was well in the kingdom. Here, Shah Jahan is shown sitting on a raised balcony, which was usually located on the outside wall of a fort or palace, presenting himself to the petitioners waiting below. The durbar was an opportunity for the common people to put forward their petitions, or make claims for justice directly to their ruler. In reality, though, it was very difficult for ordinary people to bypass the intervention of court officials. An exception was mass demonstrations before the emperor, like those used by starving people in Lahore in 1641. Upon seeing this demonstration, Shah Jahan responded with extensive famine relief measures. The other recourse for redress was the judicial system, which had courts at the capital, the provincial, and local or village levels. There were courts for religious matters, for revenue affairs, and general matters such as criminal cases. The emperor devoted one day every week to justice issues. If the emperor ordered punishment of an offender, it was often carried out on the spot. The institutions of government. The most important government institution in the Mughal Empire was the army, because the state was constantly at war, either conquering or maintaining territories. At least 3/4 of state expenditure was used to support the military. The emperor directed strategy and assigned field commanders for specific campaigns. The army minister was responsible for recruitment and recommendations for the rank and salary of mansabdars, the imperial system's officers. But each mansabdar was free to recruit his own men. The army was in the field on a full-time basis, either participating in campaigns that at times became scenes of great bloodletting or maintaining order. The victorious Mughal armies on occasion slaughtered and beheaded some of their victims, as can be seen here in the surrender of the rebel Bahadur Khan to Akbar. The emperor and his commanders exchanged information and documents daily via the imperial post, which consisted of relays of runners posted at regular intervals along the main roads. The runners carried papers and documents in bamboo containers. Mughal cavalrymen were a formidable sight. They wore chain-link armour, carried lances and muskets, and rode heavy battle horses. In battles, they were supported by cannons dragged into position by elephants. During the siege of a fort, large batteries of cannons would bombard the walls, while other soldiers dug trenches in which to lay mines to breach the walls. Following their victories, they seized the defeated commander's elephants and his treasury. The plunder from defeated rulers went into the Mughal treasury. Besides the wealth seized in conquest, the Mughal Empire collected revenue from agricultural production. Peasants used wooden ploughs, similar to the one in this modern photograph, to cultivate the land. Irrigation, supplied by canals, reservoirs and wells, was used to supplement rainfall in the growing of food grains and cash crops like cotton and sugarcane. This revenue was collected through a very distinctive feature of the imperial system, the Jagir institution. Instead of paying mansabdars a direct salary, the state assigned them the right to collect taxes of a certain area of land. They did not own the land and did not reside there. In this manner, they collected revenue for the state and ensured their own incomes. To prevent abuse, the assigned lands could be transferred from one serving officer to another as often as every 2 or 3 years. These land taxes were based on extensive information collected from each village, administrative district and province by survey parties. As the state demanded these taxes in copper coin, peasants had to grow cash crops that could be sold in the marketplace. By the 1560s, the empire had a monetary policy based on a trimetallic currency of silver, copper and gold coins. These coins were issued from mints and had the date, an Islamic statement of faith, and the profile of the emperor on them. The pictured gold coins were minted by Jahangir in 1620 and had the signs of the zodiac on them for the name of the month. Anyone could have coins minted if they paid the prescribed charges. The copper dam was the coin of daily use, so it was the coin used in city markets and to pay the wages of soldiers and labourers. International trade was another source of revenue for the empire. The link between Mughal India and early modern Europe was based on the trade in Indian textiles, raw silk, indigo and spices. Here, Akbar is seen holding court amidst a wide array of textiles. Beside the fabrics of his own costume, there are those of the courtiers, as well as the canopies and floor coverings in the palace. This international trade was largely conducted by the English and Dutch East India companies, who established trading centres along the coast. By the 1620s, the English East India Company was selling 250,000 pieces of Indian cloth at auction in London. All these goods were paid for in precious metals from mines established by the Spanish in the New World, Central and South America. By 1660, the English and Dutch companies were together shipping over 34 tons of silver and nearly half a ton of gold a year to the Indian subcontinent. The tremendous wealth of the empire meant that Akbar, Jahangir and Shah Jahan had the resources to build the splendid monumental buildings and gardens for which the Mughals are renowned. In 1565, Akbar began building the Red Fort alongside the Yamuna River in Agra. The fort is enclosed by a red sandstone wall with Akbar's palaces along the top of it. Thousands of workers, many of them women, were employed during such projects. Stonemasons were a vital part of this workforce. In 1571, Akbar turned his attention to constructing a new capital, which was built in honor of the saint Sheikh Salim Chishti, who lived in the village of Sikri and had foretold the birth of Akbar's son. Fatehpur Sikri, situated 40 kilometres to the west of Agra, is today a well-preserved but deserted palace, surrounded by a village. On the south side there is a towering monumental gate, which probably commemorates Akbar's military success. Inside the city, this view looks across water to the Panch Mahal, with its 5 tiers. Its height allowed the emperor and royal household to take advantage of cooling breezes during the summer. Historians think that the city was deserted in 1585 due to a lack of water. In 1639, Shah Jahan launched his most ambitious building project, the construction of a new capital at Shah Jahanabad, just south of Delhi. This was a carefully designed courtly city, with a great palace fortress enclosed by red sandstone walls over 2 kilometres in length. The fortress is situated at the terminus of 2 straight broad thoroughfares. Within the walls were found the emperor's palaces, mansions, a mosque, and gardens of the nobility. Religion. When Akbar became emperor, he was presiding over a predominantly non-Muslim society. Even though for centuries the Indian subcontinent, especially northern India, had been subject to repeated conquest and settlement by Muslim peoples. As there was little prospect of large-scale conversions of Hindus to Islam, Akbar established a radically new ideology for the empire, based on toleration and conciliation between Hindus and Muslims. This put the emperor into direct conflict with the ulema, Muslim men learned in the holy law of Islam. He abolished the tax imposed on Hindu pilgrims and the property tax that had been levied on non-Muslims. Akbar also became the supreme arbiter of religious affairs within his realm, which meant that the emperor would decide which point of law or opinion would be binding on the whole population. Akbar was also prepared to explore all religions. While at Fatehpur Sikri, he invited 2 Portuguese Jesuits who had made attacks on Islam to participate in discussions about Christianity. In order to avoid offense to other religions, Akbar replaced the Islamic lunar calendar with the solar calendar and forbade Muslims to slaughter or eat cows, which are revered by Hindus. This policy of toleration was continued by Jahangir. During Shah Jahan's reign, more active support was given to Islam. He built the Jama Masjid in Delhi, which is still the largest mosque in India. The courtyard has a capacity for 25,000 people. But it was Aurangzeb who brought a major shift in imperial culture. He sought to push the Mughal Empire into becoming a Muslim state. State support was restored to Muslim schools, mosques and shrines, and the property tax on non-Muslims was reimposed. As the Mughal state sought to make the population obey an Islamic government, resistance by different social groups such as the Rajput nobles, the Sikhs in the Punjab, and the Marathas in the northwest Deccan increased. Social structure. The Mughal Empire, with its predominantly Muslim nobility, ruled a largely Hindu population who had a social structure based on a caste system. In this system, the Brahmins, priests, are the highest caste, and at the bottom are the untouchables. The caste system covers a wide variety of occupations. This painting of the courtyard of a Mughal captain living in Agra gives us a rare look at urban life during the reign of Jahangir. The centre of the picture is the captain's modest home. To the left is a fakir, a Hindu holy man, who is squatting down on the veranda and being offered food, as is his privilege. The Mughal captain is watching him. The woman in the foreground is a sweeper, and therefore an untouchable. To her right is a young nobleman. Behind him, a student. But the majority of the population lived in rural areas, where local aristocrats and their chiefs ruled the cultivating peasantry. These local elites and landholders had a hereditary right to collect a share of the harvest. They cultivated the most fertile lands within villages, using landless labourers, craftsmen and traders. But this situation changed in the 1560s, when Akbar and his revenue minister began revamping the agrarian system. The local elites and landholders, who had previously only paid tribute to the state when forced to, were now allocated a fixed allowance by the state, which was about 10% of the revenue collected each year. The state also began to determine who had the legitimate right to land holdings, and encouraged the landowners to increase their productivity. The outcome was a new level of stability in the countryside, which helped inland trade and the production of textiles and cash crops. The peasantry was also divided into different classes. Wealthy peasants built up their profits from cash crops and money lending. They often owned 6 or more ploughs and bullock teams, which they let out on sharecropping terms to less wealthy peasants. At the bottom were the landless labourers, who only worked in the fields during harvests. They frequently lived in dire poverty. Such poverty was made worse by disasters like floods or droughts. During the Gujarat famine of 1630 to 32, some 3 million people died. Women. Any discussion of women during the Mughal Empire is limited to the women of royal and noble households, because these are the only ones to be documented. While the public lives of women of nobility were governed by seclusion behind a veil, Hindu women were generally able to engage in everyday activities. Muslim noble women lived in the luxurious harem, or private quarters, of royal and noble households. This harem included wives, concubines, and female relatives of the master. The women were ranked by seniority, blood ties, and favour. Akbar's harem had 5,000 women in it, and they each had separate apartments. Hundreds of women were employed in the harem as maidservants, some of whom were slaves, and as guards armed with bows and arrows. Seclusion, though, did not prevent some noble women playing a very significant role. Nur Jahan, Jahangir's favourite wife, was one such person. She is seen here with her ladies in a garden in Kashmir. As well as her talents as a designer of buildings, gardens and palace interiors, she went hunting and wrote poetry in Persian. But she is known for her political skills. Nur Jahan formed an alliance with her father, the chief minister, her brother, Asif Khan, and Jahangir's second son, which exerted tremendous influence over Jahangir for a decade. All this was done from within the harem, and her orders were issued by her eunuchs. Her power only declined with Jahangir's death. Taj Mahal, which has become one of the world's best-known monuments, is the tomb that Shah Jahan constructed for his favourite wife, Mumtaz Mahal. She died shortly after giving birth to their 14th child. Mumtaz Mahal travelled constantly with Shah Jahan and exerted considerable influence over his decisions concerning affairs of state. Aurangzeb attempted to expand Mughal power beyond the northeastern and northwestern frontiers in the 1660s and 1670s, but these campaigns failed. But as the empire depended on the revenue gained from territorial expansion for survival, he turned to the Deccan. Whilst he was able to bring the Deccan sultanates under Mughal control, the Maratha uprising left administrators ruling lands devastated by war and plundering. The Marathas also disrupted inland trade by holding up caravans and traders. By 1698, Aurangzeb declared a holy war against the Marathas and took personal charge of the army. But the never-ending Deccan Wars drained the resources of the empire and undermined the cohesion and morale of the imperial elite. The inability of the regime to maintain order in the countryside meant that peasants and landholders no longer paid Mughal revenues. Thus, when Aurangzeb died in 1707, the new emperor faced a serious financial and administrative crisis which brought about the destruction of the centralized imperial system and a decentralization of political power. After 1720, the former empire became a series of regional kingdoms who offered only token tribute and service to the emperor in Delhi. The Marathas established a counter-empire, with Pune as their capital. But a Mughal emperor did remain in Delhi until the imposition of direct British rule in 1857.